Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this week's Motormouth. You join me, Carly Brookfield, Chief Executive of Driving Instructors Association. Now, luckily for you, those who know me best and know I'm very loquacious, I won't be doing much speaking this evening, which I always say but inevitably do. But I'm really not going to speak that much this evening because this is not necessarily my area of expertise, and I don't do this job day in, day out. So I'm going to kick over immediately to someone who has lots more experience than me in the training of trainers, and that's Graham Hooper, who will then introduce our lovely panelists for the evening. And yes, I do apologise. The gender balance in this particular version of Motormouth is not commendable. We'll try and address that in the
We'll
future.
still lose. Don't worry about it, boys. We'll
In
still
terms of
lose.
ratios, you only need one female to this
Yeah,
many men anyway,
exactly.
so.
Okay, so this is the question will be, is audit dead in the water, yes or no? So I'd like all of the panelists to introduce themselves, and then I'll get to me at the end. So I'm going to ask you all that question.
Oh, before we start, Graham,
Introduce
sorry,
yourself.
just a little housekeeping. I completely forgot. I'm so out of practice with letting you do these and not me. Uh, about the chat and the Q&A. So if you've got a question for the panel, pop that into the Q&A box and I will field it to the panel when I think there's an appropriate moment, or we'll do it at the end. If you just want to chat and make comments, pop that in the chat function.
You're supposed to record it.
It is recording.
Okay, so
You're controversial.
I'm never not me. Okay, we'll start out with someone a little less controversial. Ray.
Yes.
Is audit dead in the water? Yes or no? And would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Graham. Good evening. My name's Ray Seagrave. I am an audit trainer, and I've been an audit trainer for some time now. I deliver workshops all over the country and on Zoom. I'm also an author of two books, The Driving Instructor's Ultimate Guide to Coaching Questions, and also The Driving Instructor's Ultimate Guide to Client-Centered Lessons. And to answer your question, in its current format, maybe is my view. I think, is it needed? Is it necessary? Yes, I believe it is. I think the training industry at the moment is very fragmented and there needs something to rally behind. Is it dead in the water in its current format? I think it needs some change, and it needs some further support. And it's, in my view, it is likely to change.
Okay, sounds like it needs mouth to mouth, Ray.
Yeah, I think there are two things. First of all, I think if we strip back a little bit and go, okay, well, if there wasn't an issue with the current situation in the industry where there's a backlog of driving tests, there's a backlog of part threes and part twos, would we still have a problem with audit? I think that's a question we can ask ourselves. Is is that now being compounded by the fact that the DVSA have had something like 19,000 inquiries to go on the register in 24-25 compared with 7,500. So in the previous year, so the demand is virtually 3 times to go on the register. There's a lot of pressure there from them. You can sympathise with what's happening there at the moment. Then you've got the increasing in driver test volumes. But having said that, I mean, I did an FOI, Freedom of Information, recently on the numbers of trainers that are currently on the audit register. And I don't know whether, I think I was slightly surprised when it came out to be about 485. Initially, the audit register was supposed to be a voluntary thing. It still is a voluntary thing. But since there's been a pause, there's been 452 was the count I've got on here of audit licenses that now expired. And as of when I asked for this information, there was only 33 that were currently not expired.
Okay.
So the DVSA putting a pause on that has led to a lot of that, I would say. So I think there's pressure there. Does it need looking at? Yes, it does. And I think, to be honest, Graham, you and I are very similar in this respect. I think it's needed to have been looked at for quite some time.
Okay. Yeah. All right. I'm going to cut you off there, Ray, because I think if I let you go, yeah, we could be in a match with Terry, yeah, who's could you answer the question and introduce yourself?
Good evening, everybody. My name's what's there in front of you. Audit registered, similar to Ray, have been for a while. ADI since 1998, and delivering now to PDIs and ADIs workshops and training. In answer to your question, Graham, yes.
Okay, so you think it is dead in the water?
You said yes or no, so I'm not going to go into one.
Okay.
Because I'll just start swearing and stuff. So I'm going to stick with yes to keep myself safe.
So someone who is unlikely to swear, I'm going to pick on Mark.
Thanks, Graham.
You
Good
can
evening,
swear
everybody.
if you like, mate.
No, can't imagine it. But Mark Bourne, I head up the driving academy at AA Driving School. Qualified as a driving instructor all the way back in 2005, I think it was. So just over 20 years within the industry. During that time, been fortunate enough to train driving instructors all over the world, from China, North America, across Europe, and really, look at lots and lots of different ways in which other licensing authorities really do regulate driving instructors, look at driving instructor training and things like that. And absolutely that does, give me quite a strong view, I would have said, in terms of actually just how poor the system is here in the way that that Ordit is set up. And especially when we think around, learning to become a driving instructor is much, much more than just that time that you spend in the vehicle. There's so much more that happens, and Ray's mentioned about online classrooms and things like that's there. There's in-person classrooms, there's learning systems and all sorts of things that are coming in, more so now with technology as well. And ultimately there needs to be a system that that can actually really look at that whole process of what it means to be a trainer and a training organization. So I'd actually, in answer to the question, is it dead in the water? I would say yes, it is, especially where it is at the moment. But it's also interesting as well in terms of this conversation, because this conversation, I think, comes up time and time again over the years, and the system has been looked at, and relaunched. And so it is perhaps a time for a complete refresh.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Mark. Mike, if you could answer the question.
Good. Can you hear me now?
I
can. Fine. Thank you, Mike. Yeah, crack on, mate.
Hi, Mike. Been an ADI since 2015. Began training driving instructors in 2018. Not Ordit. I did once have a chat with, forgive the pronunciation, George Contouris.
Yeah.
Bumped into him at a conference. Said I'm considering Ordit. This is in 2017, before I started doing the instructor training. He said that at that time, that there was moves and theories that they're going to make it mandatory to have driving instructor trainers to do only Ordit, and if you're not Ordit, you can't train. But he said it's got to go through Parliament. That could take a bit of time. So I carried on my way and I did the trainer course with somebody quite good looking. I'm looking at right now. Terry. Sorry, Terry.
I don't do training, so I don't know who you're talking about.
So I carried on doing what I was doing, and Ordit was attractive to me in the early days. I then spoke to an enforcer who took one of my pupils out for a part 3. It was a pass. And I spoke to him about Ordit, and his words were, don't bother. He said, unless it's mandatory, keep doing what you're doing. Since COVID, somebody who's not Ordit trained, Ordit has become less attractive to me. I used to chase it and think I'd need it, I wanted it. But speaking to Ordit trainers, looking what's online and the way the system is grinding to a halt, if it hasn't done so already, it's not attractive to me. I wish it was different, and I would like to join it. But at the moment, I don't see why I would want to.
Okay, thank you, Mike. For those who don't know me, I'm head of driver trainer development at the DIA. I'm also an independent trainer as well. I've been audit registered allegedly for as long as I can remember. I paid my money to continue my audit register before COVID, and I still haven't had a check. They got my money, yeah, but I still haven't had an audit check, and so that requires me still to take a standards check, which is ridiculous, as I don't. And I'm mandatory. I tick all the boxes to have one every 4 years. Aren't I lucky? However, is audit dead in the water? Yes, without a doubt, completely and utterly has been obliterated by the DVSA, and I can't personally see the DVSA in its current format being able to bring it back. I don't think they're knowledgeable enough within their own organisation to replace audit as we've known it. However, the question I want to throw out to the panelists and maybe to everyone as well, what could replace audit? You can have a free for all about this, panelist. First one speaks, goes. Qualifications.
Oh, I was quick on the button then. Geez, never been that quick before.
You didn't win a prize, though, Tom.
Not again.
Yeah.
Yeah, there has. I mean, sorry, Graham. Go on.
No, you go.
Look, the way audit is at the moment, it has been. It's just ridiculous. If you think about it, two things had to have happened for audit to come out the way in its form. Firstly, someone had to have the idea, let's make it mandatory. That's the first thing that had to happen. It's like, But then other people on the committee or whoever does it had to agree. So whoever came up with the idea and agreed to it, it's not mandatory. You can choose to be on it if you want, but let's raise standards. Need shooting. So if we're going to have something that is going to raise the standards, it has to be a high standard to start with. And it has some kudos. So it has to be some form of qualification. And there's a new one that's come out, as you know, Graham, that would be ideal, I think, for it. But there also has to be some sort of hurdle someone has to get over to be able to train driving instructors. They can't just walk into and do it because I wake up one morning, I fancy training instructors today. You know, I'll advertise myself as a trainer.
Well, as you know, Terry, don't even have to be an ADI.
Exactly.
It's just point, you know. So the bar is low.
There isn't a bar, Graham.
To follow up that question, like, what could replace audit? Because we may not all agree about the qualification route, because we may not all agree about what qualification should be the route. I can sense that Mark.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think Terry's right in terms of, if you look at a trainer, there has to be quality within that trainer, and a qualification is a good way of, checking that there is quality there, that they've gone through and they know what they're talking about. They know how to deliver training. They know how to motivate people. They know how to move people through the process. But I think that's only one part of it, in the fact that actually what you really want is something that is really going to have a look at an entire package of how does somebody become a driving instructor. And so that is, from my point of view, it would be looking at, well, if we're going to be recruiting trainers to come and work within the academy, how do we go about recruiting those trainers? What is our recruitment process? Are we being fair, transparent? Are we giving equal access to people? If, and fair in terms of that bit, making sure our selection processes are in there. Initial training, if there's any initial training, what's there? What continuous quality assurance is there? And then it's also looking at, well, what's the course that they're actually going to be delivering? What is it? What's the training that's going to be there? What are the resources and everything like that? What's the quality assurance on that course? So I think qualification of the trainer and actually having a credible trainer that can actually deliver a course, absolutely. But ultimately, I think it needs to be more than that. And you know, and that's my challenge with Ordit at the moment, you know, and the way that I still sort of look at it, you're going, hold on, how can you really assess instructor training when you're looking at 40 to 40, you know, 60 minutes of a session that has no link to what happened before, no link to what happened after, you know, potentially no even any training record, just a copy of what might be used. It's not
Which has
viable.
been nicked from somebody else anyway, Mark.
Quite possibly, absolutely. So yeah.
So Ray, do you want to make a comment on what could replace Ordit?
Well, I mean, I would agree with that. I mean, the problem for someone coming new into the industry now, and I think has always been this, is that where to get their training from has been so haphazard. I mean, it's the same for me when I joined the industry. I thought, well, where do I go to for my training? Who do I trust? Who are someone new to the industry wouldn't know that. And so to have a source where you can go that's accredited, perhaps, that is audited, that is trusted, that has a system or a training system that has also been audited and accredited, that's going to give those new to the industry some confidence that the training that they're going to receive has been through that scrutiny. It's very difficult at the moment for someone new where to go for that. I remember my own experience, and I didn't know, and subsequently I know now. But it's a bit of a minefield for them, and I think that's unfair. I think that someone new to the industry coming in should know exactly where to go for quality training, should know what they're going to be getting, and then that's accredited or that's been audited. And they can, you know, have some reassurance that they're going to get both, yes, a quality instructor, but also a quality training throughout.
Okay, I've got something to say, but I want to come to Mike first, and then I've got something to say, and then Carly, you might want us to pick up anything in the chat after that.
Yeah.
Mike.
Yes.
Any thoughts on what could replace Ordit? I mean, you know, or do you think don't bother replacing it, you know, at all?
No, I agree with what Ray just said. There must be a standard. There must be a structure, a framework for anyone coming into the industry to be taught the same curriculum, any part of the country. You can change your postcode. You're going to get the same service, the same delivery from anybody else. There has to be a system.
What happened? Right, I'm going to say there is a current standard for Ordit and instructor trainers. Role 6 is the current standard. There is 6 units within Role 6. And so we have the standards unless you think the standards need rewriting. Now, I know that when I deliver online training and I have an introductory one around lesson planning, I ask the question about, have people got the national standards, driving competence, ADI 1? And I would say 85% of the people on my presentation, which can range anything up from between 50 and 100, 85% don't know what I'm talking about. And I send out the standards to them the following day because they have not received them. So I think in some respects for me, we have the standards. They are there. They're not implemented.
The problem is
not implemented by lots of trainers out there, because when I pick up the pieces, the PDIs who come to be rescued haven't got a clue what I'm talking about. So do the standards need rewriting? Or, because I think they could be rewritten because I don't like the way they're written, have we got the standards? Do they need to change? Do we need to rewrite them? In my opinion, they need to be enforced. So we need to have something which is regulated to make sure that training follows through the 6 units.
Yeah, but if I can say to jump in there, Graham, thank you, because at the moment there are only 485 trainers that are audited to deliver training around those standards. yet there's a nationwide training going on. And like you quite rightly say, and I come across exactly the same thing, a lot of people new to the industry aren't seeing the national driver rider standards. All they're seeing is competences. Maybe they're being trained. Well, this is not, this is anecdotal, but they may be aware of
the
what
marking sheet, Ray.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, which we know it's the National Driver Rider Standards that's driving that, and the marking sheets, the examiners, and all of that. But there's only 485 that are audited at the moment to show that their training is delivering to those National and Driver Rider Standards. And I think you picked up on that, and I would agree with that.
Okay. Carly, do you want to go to chat? Because I can see the chat keep flashing up, but I haven't got time to read it. So is there some couple of things you want to pick out from that and the panel can answer?
Before I do that, from a DIA perspective and from my own personal experience, though I'm not a driver trainer, I do have an insight because prior to coming into this industry, I've got 25 years experience in lots of different industries, from financial services to medical indemnity, working with doctors and dentists, and very highly regulated industries with very clear vocational pathways. And I think the rot sets in with Ordit, doesn't it? The rot sets in with train the trainer, because it's not just a symptom, it's where the rot starts. Because if the whole problem of road safety is the quality of drivers, in terms of, not the whole problem, because we've got cyclists and pedestrians and other people who are causing issues, but if the whole problem of driver safety on our roads, it can be tracked back to the education that we give them to start, then if we don't fix the bit that is the training of the trainers that are going to deliver the training to the trainee, then we're never going to get a different result. It's Einstein's definition of madness, trying to do the same things over and over again and expecting a different result. And that is where it gets Groundhog Day with DVSA and DFT, who I have to deal with a lot more regularly than most people here. And that's the frustration, that we keep having these conversations, the Groundhog Day bit, about Einstein's definition of madness, doing the same thing and expecting a different result. And I don't think it necessarily always needs to be radical overhaul. I think you could just kill Ordit, because people have lost. It's not because it's bad, it's because people have lost confidence in it. And doing simple tweaks and doing simple rebrands, from my experience as a marketing and comms person, is never very effective in the long term. So yeah, I think I would bring something new into being, but I'd take the constituent parts that work and bring in new parts that could work better. But if we don't fix this bit, we're never going to get a different result in the quality of your output of your trainees. So it's really, really crucial. And I think there's a lot of people running around at the moment thinking they can fix it. And God bless them, they're going around and spending money and making investments in introducing their own qualification, but neither is that the answer. Because what we need to find out what we need to achieve first, and then build the system around it, not somebody go and get themselves accredited to run a level 5, 6, 7 driver training qualification. That could be one of the products that goes into that framework, but that is not a framework in itself. So I think there is an argument to have change, but I think instead of these endless conversations with DVSA and then these almost futile conferences that they have, we've got one coming up in June apparently to talk about Ordit, where we all go, we all turn up, and we all have the best will to input in them, and then nothing really changes. I think that's the most important message that we can all be quite helpful in sending to DVSA when we get that invite. We'll come, but we want to come and have a serious discussion about what needs to change, not be told by you that you've tinkered a bit with part 1 again, and we should all be really impressed that that's what you've been working on in all this time to change how we do training in the UK. So that's just...
And we've got part 2 and EV vehicles to do.
Yes.
Yeah, that's really going to help the standards.
We're tinkering around the edges, and we think you should be comforted by that. So, yeah, so in the chat, people are actually talking about, if you could make Ordit better, could it actually be a stronger presence in more ways? So for example, one of the suggestions here is, and I'm going to, from representing an examining body perspective, push back on this slightly because of the difference between assessing someone and training someone. One of the suggestions has been, given the resource issues with providing standards checks, for example, could audit trainers be used to perform standards checks, given the resource implications at the moment? And I would give a slight pushback from an assessment body's perspective on the ability for audit trainers necessarily to do assessing. And also, you'd have to be very careful about Chinese walls between, you can't assess somebody you've trained. Clearly, you have to have a system that has that hygiene in there. So those are some of the things that people are talking about. There are some new people to the industry who are genuinely asking the genuine question, what is so bad about Ordit? So I think in any discussion, we have to be cognizant of the fact there's people who are only just entering the industry and they're not necessarily aware of why audit is bad. They've had an audit trainer, they might have had a good experience with their audit trainer. So there is the question about what is bad about audit, and maybe we need to educate people a bit more about what's bad about it for them to understand what could be made better. Um, there was a delegate actually that's given me a really interesting piece of information that even an area manager for DBSA has fundamentally said that they think that audit is irrelevant. Now, that's somebody who should be an ambassador for their own products and services is saying a little bit like George said to you, Mike, you
Well, it
don't need
wasn't
it,
George, it was someone
their
else,
own people,
Mike, wasn't it?
yeah, or someone else, yeah, but their own people aren't sticking to the script. Their own people don't have confidence in it, and that's okay. You can work for something and not have confidence in it. But they are clearly having issues with it internally and we know that from our discussions in our stakeholder meetings with DVSA. Their ability to be able to get on top of the ADI testing and training element of things is way behind the Cat B testing recovery. So yeah, so those are some of the key themes that I'm picking up from people's chat. If people want to respond to
I
those.
think from that, Carly, the problem I have then with examiners is they're being subjective and not objective. They're starting to put their own personal, they're representing an organisation, and whether they like it or not, they've got to represent the organisation and not put their personal opinions into it. And I know several examiners who do put their personal opinions in it. And my question to them is, where's that relevant to the standards? That's your personal opinion. You have to stick to the script because that's what you've got. But then I question whether they actually know the standards themselves as well. And these standards are quite old. Go on, Mark.
Yeah, no, I was just going to come in there because I was going to mention it earlier in terms of knowing the standards and things like that. I mean, if you think we've had the standards check since 2014, I think it was first introduced, and then 2017, wasn't it, for the part 3, or 2018, I think, pretty much by the time we finally got there. But there still seems huge confusion out there within the industry as to what actually does meet the standards. You were talking about the marking sheet, and there's the classic conversations that just seem to come up time and time again in terms of say this and that will score you this and all of that sort of stuff. And I think that's the trouble is I mean, especially if you're new to this industry, where do you actually turn and where do you find a reliable voice? Because there is just so much noise out there, and I think that makes it incredibly difficult as well for training providers and legit training providers and legit trainers as well, because you almost want to go, don't listen to anybody else, or if you are going to listen to anybody else, go here, here, and here, but please ignore those other pop-ups that pop up and say, hey, we can come and provide training for you. And I think, I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, Ray brought it up earlier, 20,000 people applied to become a driving instructor in sort of 2024 to 2025. But even if you look at the dates from April 25 through to September 25, there's another 15,000 people there. And so it's massive.
Last month. The DVSA expected, they said it in January, they thought they'd plateaued and the 1,700 high mark would be the high mark and they'd come down from there. But then they come back to us in February and say we've actually had 1,800.
Yeah, it's incredibly popular to want to be. And I think the challenge is as well is, well, how many of those people are actually coming into the industry that really know what it's like to become a driving instructor, and not just to become a driving instructor, but to run their own business. Whether that's part of a franchise or part of being, fully independent or working for a local school, it's still running a business. And I think a lot of people still come into the industry not really realizing a lot of the challenges that will then bring, and also not really realizing the difference from actually being employed to being self-employed as well. And so I think that does make a big thing.
I think this is a zeitgeist moment, because if you've got the biggest volume entering the industry, and of course many of those are going to fall by the wayside, they're not going to qualify as an ADI, that these are just applicants, these numbers at the moment, but this is the moment to actually make it a better beast, because you've got this responsibility as a regulator to the people you're bringing in, to the trainer, and to the rest of the profession, and to the pupils about the quality of these new people coming in and the quality of what they're going to receive.
Mm.
Yeah.
I would agree. I mean, that first point of contact is quite crucial because, um, uh, you're having a conversation with someone that wants to be a driving instructor. It's important that they get a full understanding of what it's going to be like, what the training's going to be like, what the job's going to be like, how and how does that compare with their transferable skills? Is it something they're really going to enjoy? So that very first conversation is one of the first most important things to get across. To get a real good understanding of what the commitment's going to be like, what their life helping someone learn to be the best that they can be is going to be like, and are they going to be suitable for that? So I would echo, that's one of the most crucial things that we can do when that first point of contact. At the moment, I can't see that message is being got out nationally.
We
I,
propose a kind of almost intro course with theory test as a not mandatory, but as a way of helping people understand, like you have in some other vocations, is this the right career for you? And also to help DVSA with their administration, because it is a big administrative burden dealing with these applications. They've had to hire two
Mm,
new headcount. Now, we'd all say, if you're going to hire any new headcount at the moment, get them to the front line doing testing. And why are you
yeah,
hiring human beings in the 21st century to do application administration when you could use AI?
they are, yeah.
But it's DVSA, isn't it? So we've just got to
Mm,
be frustrated at their lack of, ability to do things in the 21st century manner. But yeah, we
mm,
suggested, and I know somebody else was working on something, but it was starting to look a bit of like a promotional video for an accountancy practice, a training body, and somebody else and somebody else. So we didn't really want to get involved too much in that because it was looking more like a marketing pitch than it was a course or an introductory thing. But we
mm,
suggested that, and I think it would be a good thing to work with audit trainers like yourselves to produce that. I'm willing
mm,
to produce it
mm,
with our resources at
mm,
DIA. It's an industry thing.
mm,
But I think, but they also shy away. There's no, DVSA can't say no. That's the legal framework. They've got to allow all these applications, but they could make it a little bit harder or dissuade some people from just throwing their hat in the ring because it does have a cost of time and
mm,
resource to allow
mm.
everybody to just have a go at doing this.
Yeah,
and it's
yeah, because
difficult for businesses to say no. If someone wants to pay you money, they're in business to say no. And there's plenty. We've been here before. If I go back 30 years, a company was no longer about is Let's Drive. And Let's Drive, I think, were bought out by what was back then the Instructor College, who then, like, the bottom line, ended up as Red. But we've been through this before, so I feel we're in a very secular place, as in we're just going round in circles.
mm,
It was a mess. It was a mess 30 years ago, and what that caused was a crash in our industry in terms of the price just going down, and there'll be a rush to the bottom, because if we just imagine if all those people were to pass their part 3, we then become, what will the lesson price be? Because everyone will be fighting for survival, it will be a mess. So I think in some respects, and I don't want to say, I mean, fortunately, I'm coming out the other end, but for those who are in the industry, how are you going to survive if we can't maintain standards?
Right, I can see Ray wanted to get in. Ray, what was
mm.
your point that you wanted to make?
Well, yeah. I mean, the current register's in statute, isn't it? So they can't shut it down.
Yeah.
They can they can't stop approving people.
Hmm.
They can't ignore applications. So they're having to then divert all the resources they've possibly got to deal with that both administrative and assessment issue. And then they see audit possibly as the low-hanging fruit where that isn't in statute, where they can pause it, and they can decide then what they're going to do with the resource, because because the pressure's on to divert that resource onto where it's needed the most, which at the moment is delivering part threes, part twos, and driving tests.
Can I
Well, they
just give you
can.
some inside information from somebody I know very well?
Go on.
1997, Rod Silcock Consultancy, yeah,
Oh, they're still
recommended a
yeah.
mandatory scheme. Yeah, we're heading for 2027, 30 odd years on, and we're still thinking we need a mandatory scheme.
Yeah.
Ain't going to happen, is it?
One of the big things that people are, just before I go on to that, I'm just going to come back to Ray's point. Yeah, I agree. And DVSA are very good at using the excuse of, and this is how they talk out both sides of the mouth. We can't change that because it's in legislation. Well, next month, actually May, you're going to lay changes to legislation that suit you very well that will make it illegal for an instructor to go into the booking system.
Yeah.
So there's one thing you've managed to rile yourselves up to actually do
Yeah.
something that's legislative. Because, those of us who sit in those stakeholder meetings, they're sick of the we can't do that because it requires a change to legislation. It's almost like computer says no, isn't it? But it's funnily enough, when they want to do something, suddenly they find the magical power to to change legislation.
Yeah.
But one of the things that people are saying in the chat here, and I think it's a good question to pose to you all. If you could ground zero it and build it back up again, ignore what's gone before, what is it that you would put in place?
Carly, if I could come in there, and actually, I think it's absolutely goes back to what you were saying, earlier. And I mean, if I look at the best licensing authority that I've had the opportunity to work with is ICBC in British Columbia, and ultimately they're responsible for driver testing. They're also responsible for the initial insurance drivers have. They're an insurance organisation, so it makes sense to them as well that they have safer drivers out there. And ultimately, what their equivalent and national standards, far more in depth. If you want to deliver a driving instructor training program, it's a process of actually having your curriculum approved before you can do anything. You're then, any trainers, like Terry said earlier, they have to meet a minimum requirement. Not a qualification, if I remember rightly, it was a few years ago, but not a qualification, but certainly a certain level of grading, a certain level of experience in terms of number of years, but also what they delivered. They had different grading as well, depending on what you were going to be delivering, and how much supervision you would have and things like that.
Once upon a time.
Yeah, that's it, exactly. I was going to say, I think we did, didn't we? And
we
things
had
like that.
part
And
two, you could be audit for part 2 and you could be audit for part 3, and then you move on and you get both.
Yeah, that's exactly. And it's that sort of thing in terms of it needs to allow people to become driving instructor trainers, if that's part of what their career plan is and things like that, and not restrict that. So there needs to be that natural sort of build up of, right, I'm a novice, I'm new into this, I've got a certain level of accreditation, and then I'll move on and build up. So I think, if you're starting again, start with what we want to achieve. Yeah.
Yeah.
What do we want to achieve? We want to achieve safer drivers out there, especially our younger drivers, so they don't make these crazy decisions that affect the rest of their lives. And so I think ultimately you start with that, and then you go, right, what's the very, very best system that you can build up from that?
And just on the back of that, the problem at the moment is that, as we know, the driving test is a fault-based assessment, and the DVSA are there to conduct driving tests, and they're audited on that and deliver a certain amount. But driving is not just skills-based, is it? Yes, skills are required, but actually we see this every day that when all the skills are learned, it's behaviors that really determine a safe driver or not. Now build a system around that, and then we're starting to make some real impact on the road. Because when the DVSA have got a website that says ready to pass, there's mixed messaging there. Actually, what it should say is ready to drive safely, ? And then everything that we do should be around delivering, well, what is safe driving for life? What does that mean? For a driver, it's about us as human beings and what our tendencies are, how we manage our emotions, what are our thoughts, our beliefs, how we act on the road based on our how we can control our anger, our frustration, our egos. Build a system around that. And now we're starting to really attack what I think is the real problem, which is that when you've got an assessment based on testing skills, there's always going to be someone prepared out there just to teach skills for someone to pass a driving test.
Right. Many years ago, and a friend of mine, John Sheridan, we sat in what was the driving test, where examiners were taught. It was Cardington, headquarters of all learning within the industry. And the question was, it's not what we teach, it's how. we teach. And we haven't moved an inch from what to how in the majority of training that is delivered.
Yeah.
Most people will train what to teach, but we all know that it's all written down. It's driving the essential skills. You know, if you want to pass a test, it's in the standards. But where does it ever show you how to teach? And, you know, I don't believe that the DVSA are capable of delivering that program. I think we are capable of delivering that program, but we're a fragmented industry with everybody having their own ideas.
They're not an education body, and that's the problem. And actually, I've had many an argument with them, with certain individuals who, don't like conversations about looking at best practice elsewhere in the world, which is what Mark's just referred to. And I'm a huge advocate of that. We should look at other industries. We should look at other parts of the globe, and we should. Why recreate the wheel? If there's something good going on in the training of pilots somewhere, we should adopt that. You know, the Milestones project, I completely stole that from private pilots licensing procedures. You know, if there's something good going on in examiner training in another world, you transplant that. But there is always. I actually had the registrar at the time, not Mark McGee, not Malik Taylor, so work out which person it is, who was, after I'd said a few times, we should look at this, because I'd worked for the teacher training agency at one point, we should look at that, we should look at medical. And I got this childish response, which was, oh, you love referring to best practice, don't you, Carly? And I'm like, I'm kind of looking around the room saying, what's the problem with looking at best practice in other industries? Because we sure as damn it are not perfect here, are we? We should be looking outwards.
Otherwise, you end up examining your own navel.
Yes.
which is what's been happening for like the last 20 years.
Yeah.
I think it also as well, it comes down to the fact that obviously the DVSA are very, very good at assessment. You know, that's what they do is assess people. And you know, Ray, you said about the fault-based driving test. Graham, you said earlier around you know, people being trained for the Part 3 test and being very, very test focused. But it's because ultimately that's the way everything is set up. We are not a curriculum-centric, you know, licensing authority. We are a test-centric licensing authority. And I think whenever you've got that, it naturally, no matter what standards you put out there, everybody will go, that's what gets taught at the end of the test. And that's the thing.
Sorry to interrupt. The problem is that that's reflected in the pass rate.
Yeah.
The pass rate is so appalling because we are test focused. Yeah. And it's ironic, isn't it? Everyone wants to pass a test. Give me information about what do I need to do to pass the test. Give me that. If I do this, will I pass it? And of course, it's not ever any skill based in actually how am I going to get this message across to my learner driver. And, you know, the wheels turning situation with, you know, we went through after COVID, just demolished that even more and just become completely skill based. And I've still got people saying to me, oh, I'm not allowed to pull over on my Part 3 or my standards check. Still saying it. Coming from examiners, it's just like I could, you know, buy a gun and shoot myself because it's. I don't know how we change, and I really don't know how we change what we've got without. We've all got to sing from the same hymn sheet, and how we join everyone together. That we have lots of egos and lots of ideas. How we join that up and put it under one banner so it's got some consistency, and then who's going to assess those new standards? So that's my question. If we did have a magic wand and we've got it, the industry comes together and we agree, who is going to assess the standards?
Graham, before we move on to who, just one thing to say in terms of, you know, maybe a glimmer of hope in the way that I see things is, you know, we've got recent conversations around minimum learner periods, you know, and more movement as well, you know, with Ireland, Northern Ireland, sorry, going to graduated driving licenses and things like that. And I think that's the bit where you go, well, actually, that is looking not just at passing a driving test now. That is starting to expand that driver education. And I think if you start in there, then that's where then you can start to go, well, actually, yeah, there is best practice elsewhere. There is opportunity to have a look at a broader way of educating drivers, and therefore then also educating the trainers of those drivers. So I think, one thing that we haven't had in the whole time of audit is something that is a little bit more curriculum focused, that's potentially going to be able to come in. And I think that's the important bit of getting that.
Can
bit
you role
right.
play some faults, Mark? Can you role play? Well, you've passed your.
Well, you've seen my driving.
Congratulations,
But yeah.
Mark.
Well,
You've
Mark and I actually, great minds think alike. So yesterday I was at the Northern Ireland Assembly, giving evidence to their select committee about graduated driving schemes, because whilst it's applaudable, for want of a better word, that Northern Ireland is bringing this in, there's been some controversy because driving instructors didn't know it was coming in. It's always been in legislation to be able to do it since 2016, but driving instructors in Northern Ireland were given very, very scant notice that they were actually going to enact a GDL, and so were Northern Ireland Assembly members too. So I was asked to go and give evidence to the committee with the umbrella organisation of instructors over there, as well, and ABI, who are absolutely useless. Every encounter I have with the Association of British Insurers as a membership body, they are useless. But I'd rather have Bieber in that room, because at least they know more about motor insurance. But I agree with Mark. Because of those conversations, I'm now working very closely with DVSA in Northern Ireland, and we pushed ourselves in there to a huge degree as well and said, look, you're going to do GDL. We're running a kind of GDL scheme on behalf of DFT in the UK, Milestones. We have some thoughts on GDL as well. We represent driver trainers across the UK. We'd like to be in that conversation because, unfortunately, too many changes around road safety, and even the road safety strategy in the UK, was its launch, didn't in 22,000 words mention driving instructors once. There's not enough the driving instructors in these processes. Mark and me went to a minimum learning period roundtable the other week, and that was part of the discussion, was the voice of the driver trainer being heard in these things. So I'm with Mark. I'm excited because I do think things like this do offer an opportunity. However, during that evidential hearing yesterday, some of the concerns I was feeding in was, even in the Northern Ireland scheme, there's gaps. Northern Ireland has an opportunity to do something world beating. They really have. And they are, without patronising them, they're so small, it gives them more ability and agility to do that. And I think they're a good test ground for us to all get involved with, to try and say, look, this has worked over there and it's having an impact. Southern Ireland's scheme of 12 pre-test modules is not proving as effective because their road deaths have gone up since they've had it in. Perhaps because they didn't restrict licenses. Post-test is one argument, but their scheme is not necessarily working. But we did express concerns that in the whole scheme, there's not enough talk or framework of training trainers to be able to deliver this change. And we've already got a problem with training of trainers in the world that we're in. We definitely want to fix that problem in the GDL world, otherwise it will undermine GDL schemes. We've also got the problem of, with the minimum learning period consultation in the UK and GDL in Ireland, we are saying it can be an ADI that signs things off or an accompanied driver. Now, if you're going to let an accompanied driver sign off hours and that's all they've got to ratify that you've done a certain hours, okay, there's an argument that helps increase private practice. The feedback we gave to the committee yesterday was, if you're going to get them to do competency assessment and assess whether a competency has been reached, that is a novice teaching a novice. How can a novice, not even a driver trainer, assess competency and sign that off? So that's got to be thought about. And the training, I think it's Sweden and Finland, they have an accompanied driver program. Portugal's just brought that in as well. And so I think, there is a huge opportunity there, because not because GDL in Ireland is going to be amazing, it's because it's got gaps in it and they're actually listening, because they brought it in too quick too soon and it's being scrutinised for that reason. But at least it's making everybody's ears open about the fact that they've got to address those gaps and they've got a real opportunity. So I do think us being involved in that conversation is really damn important. It might think, well, why do we care what's happening over there? Because that is the pilot for what we could bring over to the rest of the UK.
Okay. A thought, with the imminent collapse of the DVSA actually maintaining standards for us, because I think that is imminent. The problem I see then is this already, because of their inability to cope, the first steps towards deregulation and the first steps towards a free-for-all? Because let's face it, as you were saying, Carly, anyone can train someone, can teach someone to drive with no qualifications over the age of 21 and holding a license for what, over 3 years? That's it. What sets us apart is that there is a process to go through so that we can take money. Take that away, and it's a free-for-all. Anyone can teach anyone for money. Is that knocking on the door? And what we're talking about, the whole standard collapsing?
Disconnected.
Is that, I don't know, but I get a little bit scared in my head, in the background, that actually, if they can't deliver standards to us, what the hell are they going to do? And do we need to now, as you know, talking to everyone here, create something that can maintain standards in this industry? And do we need to sit down as a group, all of us around a round table, and see if we can come, and it won't be an easy task, I don't think, come to some form of agreement? And that's among many different people. There's always going to be some who don't want it.
I think if you want to get to that, Graham, I think a lot of people, well, everyone has to leave the egos at the door. Because, like you say, we're all kind of aiming to go in the same direction. But there are some shortcuts and offshoots and stuff that people want to take as well. So it would be wonderful if we could get something sorted and get something along those lines, because the standards at the minute are shocking.
I'm glad you didn't say
I did catch myself. And the industry, like you've implied, Graham, is going down the toilet. Standards are going down the toilet. And it's, you know, if someone does flush it, then we'll all be gone. So there has to be some change. But the positive side is there are lots of us out there that want to see the change and are happy and willing to make the effort to make the change, because it's a great industry. We do great work and vital work, and it's something worth fighting for, you know.
And as an advocate, not an expert and not a professional myself, but as the advocate who's normally in the room, to kicks the door open to be in the room for us to actually have these conversations with people who don't necessarily understand the industry, but it's your thoughts that are coming out of my mouth, believe it or not. You know, that's what we were saying in conversations around the minimum learning period. And Mark was there. He knows what was said. I'm not betraying Chatham House rules, because it's actually, this was my piece, and I've said it publicly before that meeting, that it is a ludicrous situation if you think about it, how we learned to drive in the United Kingdom. And I don't know why we're so arrogant about it when you compare us to the rest of the world, because we're way behind now, in that we say to people, we've created a regulatory framework where an instructor has to pay to train and invest in training and be trained and go through these hurdles. And then they're regulated and they have to keep paying to be regulated. But then we say to people, you can just train with who you want, though. You can go with mum and dad. You know, you can go with somebody who's had a license for 3 years. And by the way, you can learn what you want as well, because we don't mandate the instructor with a program of learning, and we don't mandate you as a pupil with a program of learning. So we've no way of real benchmarking. We don't mandate anything. We can't really assess quality to a huge degree. And the system that we have for the ratifying instructors is not mandatory either. It doesn't really have a strong criteria. And yeah, so go off and learn with who you want, what you want, when you want. And when you've done your theory test, toddle off to the test centre when you want, because there's no barriers to that as well. And then you sit there as a bunch of road safety stakeholders and say, well, as long as we get restricted licensing, that's going to be the silver bullet to all of this. Well, it's not. We know that. And the countries that do well with GDL, restrictions post test, have actually got a much tougher learning to drive regime and a much more robust one than we do as well. That's what's part of their success. So, you know, this is the ludicrousness that we're in, and we've got to, one of the first steps is to actually say, yeah, it is ludicrous. It is ridiculous. It needs a lot of work, but there is goodwill, as you said, Terry, to actually do that work. You've just got to go and talk to the people like yourselves who've got the experience. And that was my major frustration, is policymakers don't always speak to the people who have the knowledge, the people who sit with the trainers training them and with the pupils training them. We have road safety charities who never sit in a car with a young person opining on young driver training. You know, we have people opining on the quality trainers who never sit with a trainer being trained. So we've got to break that disconnect as well. But I think with a view to making DVSA know what's possible and how the industry is willing to work together to achieve that, the idea that they've vaunted of having a conference for audit trainers in June, I think we as a collective should be strongly putting to them, we don't want you to define the agenda of that. If you're going to bring all these people together, the audit training universe should define that agenda. And we don't want a day where you just stand there and give us a presentation about what you've been tinkering with and tell us what you're doing. It needs to be a proper conference where there's discussion about what could be done better. And I don't think that always happens in things like the car forum, DVSA meetings regularly. It's too provider led. It's too let us tell you what we've been up to and let us tell you what we want to tell you rather than listen to what you think we should do to change things.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Carly. Absolutely. I think it's how how susceptible, how open the DVSA are to take on I mean, they want to go out to the industry. They've obviously arranged this thing in June. And they're calling it a workshop. You know, they're looking for feedback from the industry. They then take away that feedback. They might go to a consultation after that, but it's the degree to which they will take on the views and opinions of those at the coalface, and then really shape something that's going to be a real force for the future. And if we've got an opportunity to say our piece at that particular event and put our voice across strongly, but more importantly, go in there with something that is collaborative, that is thought through, that is coherent, that is you know, everyone together singing from the same hymn sheet, then hopefully then they're more likely to take that on board and run with that.
I think we do need to control that agenda, and one of my suggestions is going to be to DVSA. I think you need to have a little working party who helps you shape that agenda. Otherwise, you're just going to hire in a facilitator who has nothing to do with the industry again, like we've had in other meetings, who has us running around putting post-it notes on the wall, you know, and is doing very hackneyed team building and strategic thing that isn't necessarily relevant to what we're doing. And for my mind, that day should have things in it like best practice elsewhere. You know, let Mark Bourne stand up and talk about the best practice he's seen in British Columbia or other places, because that helps us build a straw man of what could we do better, and how can we shortcut doing better by copying somebody else's way of doing it? Because you know that's a good way to shortcut it and get what you want. There could be other experience, people with better experience than the DVSA guys standing there running the workshop and letting the industry run the workshop rather than a regulator who clearly does not have enough of a clue.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. Absolutely. Yeah. But it's how we get that message across. Hopefully we can do that.
Mike, can I ask you a question? Because as a driving school, how do you see what we're discussing affect you and your business? Because you know you're not a national driving school; you're a local driving school. How do you feel? You know what we're discussing might affect your business in any shape or form.
Well, it can only make it stronger. If there is a framework, if there is a bare minimum standard across driver training, trainer training, then that's your bar. You can't go below that. To touch on something Carly said a minute ago about how you can almost hop, skip, and stumble through your part 1, part 2, part 3. When you've done your part 3, there is no requirement, and no one's looking at you to continue CPD. People don't do CPD until they get their letter through the post saying you've got a standard check. Then they do CPD. So at the moment, you could have somebody out there who qualified. I trained some PDIs just before lockdown. They've not had their first standard check yet. They passed their part 3 before lockdown. They're still running around now thinking that they're okay. And maybe they are. Maybe they're not. But we're not even looking after ourselves. Before we look after our trainers, we're not even looking after the people who might want to be on audit or who are coming into the industry now. We're going through our part 3, and then it's a case of, well, there's enough rope, don't hang yourself. But if you do, I'm not going to be watching anyway. So to have all this new structure, this new implementation coming in, build it up from ground zero, it can only be a good thing. We're one of thousands of driving schools around the country who perhaps don't have audit trainers on their books. We have successes and failures like audit trainers do as well. but we're just, for want of a better word, we're just stumbling around the dark, to be honest. We're looking at what we've done before. It worked before. Let's do it again. We'll go on some CPD that is or is not DVSA authorized or approved, because the person given the training may not have the standards that they should be teaching. So it's all very, very loose. It's really loose at the moment. If we can tighten it up and make it structured, not a closed men's group or a closed persons group, but it can't be as free as it is at the moment.
And I also don't necessarily think it should be CPD, because that's been misconstrued by the industry, and there's lots of voluntary blah blah blah.
Yeah.
It should be CPC. You know, we're working with the taxi and private hire industry to look at a CPC framework, and the licensing authorities now to increase standards and increase safety of those drivers. CPC has been done badly. We know that in the other world. JAG was a disaster of going on 7-hour courses and doing the same 7-hour course year after year, and as long as you went on it. But the principle of this certified competence and refreshing it and examining it every year or every so many years is replicated. Again, best practice. Go and have a look at other vocations and go and figure out why they're more respected, because they have a much more robust framework for the ongoing development and assessment and competency checking of those professionals in there. You wouldn't fly with a lot of ADIs based on the qualification framework, would you? But you will fly with a pilot who has a CPL, because you know damn well how rigorous the training to qualify is, and then the post training and the training that happens on a weekly, monthly basis, and the surveillance of that pilot when they're working, as well. So that's why we trust those of us who fly very frequently, because we've got that confidence in their skill and ability.
Yeah, I mean,
can I ask a question to the whole panel? Sorry, can I just a question?
Yeah.
Mike, you can answer what you were going to answer. I think the question I've got now is, look, we've got an idea of what the bigger picture we'd like it to be and what should it look like. I think the question to the panel is, and we've got some great stuff in the chat, but there's so much in the chat I don't think we'll get through it this week, let alone this evening. So apologies for not getting back to all the stuff in the chat.
The AI note taker is summarising this, not just me, so we will capture it all. Yeah.
Okay, so where should we start? So if I can throw that out, and I'll go round the panel because I'm conscious now of time. I'll finish with you, Carly. So let's start with Ray. Where should we start? Or Mike, do you want to continue with what you were going to say, because I cut you off? And I can start with you.
Yeah, I was just going to carry on by saying the CPD is so loose that you can attend a local association meeting and sign off as CPD, and we've done is sit around and moan about the car park in the supermarket. If you're going to start anywhere, you start with a framework where there's no grey, it's black or white. You do it or you don't do it.
So rubber stamping CPD.
Yeah.
I'm not going to ask you should rubber stamp the CPD yet, but that's the starting point for you, Mike. Rubber stamp, make CPD compulsory and rubber stamp it in, have CPD accredited programs of some description.
If you are going to copy other industries, if you look at a tradesperson, electrician, they've got to keep their training up.
Yeah,
they've got to do minimum every year, but we don't.
Yeah, and probably more people die on the roads than what they do from electrocuting themselves.
Well, and also when people worry about it being deregulated and coming away from DVSA, and will that be a disaster? No, because gas safe is much better being run by Capita than it ever was run by a public sector body. So there is an argument to say how things can be run better when they're taken away from a regulator.
100%.
Okay, Mike, thank you. Yeah. Mark, where should we start?
So I suppose I just want to come back to a couple of points, actually. And one thing I'd say, obviously, we are all aware of driving test backlogs for the last 6 years now in terms of driving test backlogs. And if you think about the amount of media attention that it's got, the amount of lobbying it's got, the amount of attention it's got, it's only really quite recently that it's actually got the National Audit Office really looking at it last year, Transport Select Committee looking at it, and things actually being put into place and change. And I suppose my point is, it takes an awful lot to make change happen.
Mm.
And so my point of where we should actually be starting, I think the biggest opportunity for change is actually with what's coming up with the minimum learner period. And it's then going, right, well, if we're going to have that as our best practice, okay, which we can all talk about whether it should be more graduated driving licenses and things like that. But if that's going to be what we're going to have in place, well, it's how do you then capitalize on that and build from that, rather than trying to get the DVSA to change, because I think the people that control the DVSA are going to take an awful lot of time to actually listen. So you go, well, we've got that. That's what everybody's going to be looking at. Well, how do you then come in on that and start to build from there?
Yeah,
turning that oil tanker
culturally,
around
it's not because they're an oil tanker. Sometimes people say things can't change because it's an oil tanker organization. It's very slow to move. It's not. It's a cultural thing. If you ever sit for a long time with it.
Absolutely is. Yeah.
And at the moment, it's also a panic thing. They can't perceive of any more remit to fulfill than what they've got to fulfill with Cat B testing. They're like rabbits caught in the headlight at the stuff that they're already having to deal with. So suggestions of great stuff that we could be doing beyond that are just frightening to those people internally. I think it's a little bit of I always use the analogy of Kevin Costner in The Field of Dreams where he says that line, if I build it, they will come. If I build that baseball diamond, the old players will come back. We've been successful in some of the projects that we developed, and the way that we can work effectively with people like DFT and DVSA, because we've been in with a properly thought out plan, and we haven't been baby birds expecting somebody else to change things for us. We've actually gone in with the plan and said, this is how it's going to work, and actually the industry can do it, or these bodies can do it, or these people can do it. And I think the audit conference in June should be maybe focusing on how can the industry take more on and do more stuff. So you as the regulator don't feel you have to, you're just supporting it, but also so you can't give the excuse that you've got to deliver it so it can't happen.
Okay. Ray.
Yeah, I think we should start with what we want. What is it that we want to end up with, and what is currently wrong with the way that we are doing that's not delivering that. If we're looking to build a system or build a method of training that goes throughout the whole process, which I think audit was there to do, then it's the changes we need to make to that so it filters down, and that we train in a way that PDIs and ADIs then train in a way that deliver what we want. And if we want safe and responsible drivers, what does that look like in terms of the training? Then filter that back up. So we train the way that we would expect to train someone, that they would expect to train someone, to get the best result possible, which is train someone that's looking to be the best that they can be, rather than go away after the driving test and do what the hell they like.
Okay, Terry.
Magic one time then. So
you can always play the death knell. Yeah.
What?
Yeah. You could hum that if you want. I think you'd be very good at it.
I'll leave the singing to you, Graham. It has to start at the top. It has to start at the absolute top, whether it's DVSA or another entity. We have to help people understand what coaching actually is, and that includes examiners, because I'm not sure many examiners notice coaching techniques at all. So we have to start there, and the trainers who train the instructors have to understand it and have to have some form of hurdle to cross, to get over, some barrier to get over, to get into that club. Because at the moment, like I said earlier, there's no hurdle. They can just walk into it and do what they want. So only then can we get proper training for ADIs, and it has to be hard. You can't do it. You shouldn't be able to do this training on YouTube, for crying out loud. You shouldn't be able to go through this with no training. You shouldn't be able to use AI to become a driving instructor. It's just a ridiculous situation we're in. Because it's so easy. There are no barriers, which is why so many people are failing, I guess. And then we need to make sure, and keep checking that these driving instructors are teaching these young kids how to get home safely. Because we are failing. As an industry, we fail. The KSI stats tell us we fail. And nothing has changed. KSI stats never fall. Cars get safer, roads get safer, but KSI stats stay the same, which is we're the common denominator here. We've got to change what we do. We've got to do better than we're doing at the minute. And it's like like all of us here understand it's coaching that does that. And until we start at the top and it all feeds down like the GDE, nothing's going to change. So we have to start at the top and we have to start making sure that the people that train the people know what they're bloody doing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm going to say my piece and then hand it over to you to close, Carly. As someone who's probably been involved in a cultural change in the past, for argument's sake, the people in the trainers across the UK have embraced, on the whole, the ones I know, coaching for driver development has grown. I remember when I first put my head above the parapet and got shot by every gun loaded about coaching, that there has been a shift. Now, that shift hasn't happened completely. However, what I'm asking now is that a cultural change means that everyone buys in to a cultural change, and that's not us pontificating here, but also the people listening to us must want it as well. And if we can start that drip, because it is a drip, yeah, not you, Terry, just a drip, yeah. If we can start that drip, and the world's changed from when I stuck my head above the parapet, because we've got social media, which empowers things a little bit quicker. And that old saying, you have to fight the good fight. We have to stand up and be encountered and put our views across. And we need the backing from the people who are listening to us. And I've got, modernising driver training. That was a great project.
That's why I put it in there. We had a great template.
And it was buried along with where room 101, along with where Ordit's going now. Unfortunately. But yeah, that was a great project. But know
that's a not recreate the wheel. There was a template there for doing it. There were some good ideas in it. It was independent because there was a consultant involved in running it. And I think we need to grab that, dust it off, and say, okay, there's our straw man for that. Let's use that as the basis and build out from there.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is, if we start to do it as a collective, we have something to go to the ministers with.
Yeah.
Because I know that when client-centered learning was introduced to the industry, I had to go and see the DVSA in Nottingham and produce evidence that client-centered learning would work in this industry. And they had to take that to the minister to get it approved, and it got rubber stamped. Now, the ideas are already there, but we've got to push that as a collective and try to be on the same page. Now, I don't know what the same page actually looks like now, because we're going to have many, many different ideas, but we have to start somewhere. And that starts with us fueling that cultural change, saying we would like this. And I think there will be quite a number within the industry who don't want to be standards checked or don't want CPD. However, it changes over time if we push.
Okay, well, thank you very much, panelists, for your inputs to this. There was clearly never going to be enough time in an hour for this particular conversation, but I think it was useful to start gathering thoughts from a diversity of trainers. I'm certainly going to take it back to DVSA that ahead of that meeting in June, they should look to establish a working party for audit. And I think that should be a working party that exists anyway. Road safety more widely, myself and Mark know, God, they're fond of establishing a working party there. So, and it can be very effective. But I think this would be a good area to actually have one. And I think they could be useful in starting to look at what really should be the agenda of that day. What do we want the outcomes of it to be, and therefore design an agenda that suits. And it should involve people who are on audit, but it should also involve people like Mike, who's got this view from outside of audit and has his rationale for not being part of audit. What's gonna make everybody want to join together and fight the good fight. So very much that's something we'll take back as a stakeholder organisation, and I'll also be having conversations with Department for Transport about, some of these issues that we're seeing here in Train the Trainer are, very important in the whole conversation about the output of the trainer, which is the driver, and their quality as well. So yeah, thank you so much, and thank you very much for the attendees tonight. We've gone slightly over as we always do, but I think it's a really important topic, so we didn't want to cut the time because there's some really great inputs from people, some really great ideas as usual. This is where our membership really informs our strategy and policy and our views on things and helps shape the actual output. So I'll be summarizing those. Well, AI, that's the beauty of AI. AI will be doing this work that I used to have to do after these webinars, and I'll circulate that to the panel and also the attendees as well. And we can share that with whatever working party is convened to help shape that day on audit and shape a better way of working on the whole issue of audit and whatever comes after it. So yeah, thank you very much. And you are all released to go and enjoy what's left of your
wanted to
evening.
mention something before you finished,
Oh, the
Carly.
only thing I was going to ask you to do is if I can urge you all, we are running a survey at the moment. NJC have now very kindly shared it, and MSA as well with their membership. We are asking people to look at the process of the consultation on the booking system and how they were consulted and give us their views and their feelings about that. That's an important piece of work in our lobbying around the changes to make it, not so much the changes to the booking system and the policy, but actually changes to make it illegal for instructors to book tests. It's another kind of step in the direction of disenfranchising instructors. So it's important we look at the process that was taken to get there, because there are some real challenges in how that consultation was carried out and the evidence that is being used to make these decisions. So we want to understand, was that the experience of the instructors responding to that consultation? Did they feel informed? Did they have sufficient information to make a response? So you'll find that link to that survey in our member updates that have gone out this week, and you'll find it in MSA and NJC's updates as well. So yeah, if you can fill that in, that would be amazing, because one of the reasons there was an imbalance in that consultation originally was there was never going to be enough instructors responding to it, because there's only 44,000 of you guys versus hundreds of thousands of members of the public. But if there are more people responding to more consultations from the industry, the voice gets louder. So and one of the issues was in that consultation there was only about 6,000 or 7,000 ADIs out of 44,000 who actually responded to that consultation. So if we can get some more voices in at least things like these surveys challenging the view that was a solid consultation, that would be great. So yeah, appreciate any input you guys can give in that as well. So thank you. You can all go and enjoy a glass of wine, glass of beer, tea, coffee, whatever your beverage of choice is.
Thank you, everyone.
Right.
Thank you to the
Good night, everyone.
attendees. Thank you to the
Take care
panelists.
then. Bye
Bye
bye.
all.
Bye bye.
Thank you.